Welcome to Alphacenturion. This is something, clever title. Let's start off with entertainment. Titans is still doing the Red Hood saga, sans Batman, but keeping the new Robin theme from the original comic, asking the question, will Jason live or die? Only now with Tim Drake as Never Was Robin. Also, Black Star and Superboy are hooking up. It was a good episode, 4 out of 5. And disagreeing with Starkville's House of L. Sorry, that's Superman and Lois TV talk. I want Connor to guest star on a special episode of WB's Superman and Lois. Now that parallel Earths are back and Steel's daughter, yet to be revealed to be a different secret villain that just happens to look like his daughter, Twist, is now on the show. Next, let's talk about Shang Chi. I know this is a late review, but the movie was fun, but the middle part was boring. The best part and the best actors to come out of this movie were the two villains, Razor Fist and the Mandarin that's not the Mandarin but is still the Mandarin actors, respectively. And I'm not talking about Ben Kingsley, just to be very clear. So it is too bad, on the other hand, that the actor playing Mandarin is being blackballed, or at least blacklisted, because of some comments he made years ago concerning China. And even more inconvenient is some of the comments made by the lead actor who is playing Shang-Chi. He has some questionable takes, which if you watch That Star Wars Girl, you can get more on that. Next up is Hawkeye. He has a Netflix series coming up. It's based off the very awesome Matt Fraction run of Hawkeye, introducing one of my favorite legacy characters, Kate Bishop. Too bad that run was ruined by off-panel politics. I'm looking at you, Matt Fraction. And that wasn't cool. In books, I just finished John C. Maxwell's 101 Attitude. Or 101 Attitude, or Attitude 101, whatever. It was a good book. It didn't have a lot of real material. If anything, it's more of a power of positive thinking meets motivational type material. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone looking for a deep dive, but if you just want something that hints at how to maintain a positive attitude, there's nothing wrong with this book. On the YouTube front, we have Shu versus Big Joel and Adam and Stitch versus Sargon. A new personality came out of Sargon. One arguing for universal relativism, whatever that might be. Big Joel showed himself to be a hypocrite, going after Shu, who, in all honesty, I stopped watching once she went a little bit further left. But she's still as funny as ever, and there's no reason not to watch her if you don't mind her evolution in politics. Adam Friended, on the other hand, he went and talked about female abs and the trans agenda. Adam Friended defended tomboy abs, which I have to agree. I think abs on an athletic-looking female look great. So I don't have a problem with this one. But if you do, and you think that you want to share it, and that somehow having abs is progressing the trans agenda, feel free to comment down below and watch me block you. I'm sorry, I meant counter you with a cogent argument. Next up on the YouTube front, James White went after and went deep. Well, let me rephrase that. James White went deep into anti-vax territory on his Alpha and Omega Ministries, or possibly his Radio Free Geneva show. James White really deep dived into the anti-vax territory, but to be fair, he really wasn't trying to be anti-vax so much as anti-cove vax. Yeah, that's right. And his arguments are actually pretty good for him, as they're based on positive freedoms and rights. But the problem is that these freedoms and rights, these positive rights and positive freedoms, well, he's kind of being hypocritical there, because when it comes to homosexual rights in the LGBTQ community, he doesn't honor those rights for them. So it's kind of hypocritical that now he wants those rights for himself and his group, which, just to let him know, the sword does cut both ways. Still on the James White front, him and Logicked both went after Todd Farrell of Wretched Radio. That's right. An atheist and a Calvinist agreed on something, sort of. I'll be honest, I love listening to James White, even though he himself will claim to stand against everything that I believe. We both do believe in God. And I do love listening. I do love listening to Logic. To be fair, him and Atheism is Unstoppable are two of the reasons why I even started watching YouTube. And Logic clearly doesn't agree with me on religion or theology, as he is an atheist and an anti-theist. And as for Todd Farrell, I really do like listening to his voice. But you know who doesn't? Logicked. Logicked was very annoyed by his voice and very annoyed by his argument, or his take on an article from, I don't know if it's American Magazine or Reasons Magazine or something like that. And it was on the 7 reasons why a global flood is real, which is interesting because he was presenting legitimate facts. He just came to very different conclusions than almost anyone else would come to, but it was still interesting. James White also did a takedown video on Todd Farrell, but this time it wasn't about global flooding. No, apparently there is some kind of beef or some kind of argument going on in the Calvinist or evangelical world, or whatever world they both belong to, as they're both speaking at G3. And the question or the problem or the argument that they're having with each other is the question of, should you attend a church that is mandating that their congregation get the COVID vaccination and mask? As a Catholic, this is not a problem for me, because my bishop, Bishop Flores, is asking all his congregants to mask up and to get vaccinated and to even do the 6 feet apart thing, even if you are masked and vaccinated. So, not an issue for me. Next up, Prophet Azad. He went after Mike Winger on what happens to people who have never heard the word. As someone who's not a fan of Mike Winger, and as someone who, like I just said, I really liked Logic's video on Todd Farrell, you'd think I'd be down with this video, but I am not. The Prophet of Zod was doing his usual BS. He was doing everything is bad faith and everything is a logical fallacy straw man, and not listening to what Mike Winger was actually saying, as Mike Winger was being very honest and very raw, saying that he was struggling to find an answer. Sorry, Zod, but on this one, you are the straw man. And then next up, we have, on a more positive note, Pints with Matt Whitman has occurred, and our civilization has discovered ecumenicalism. And I'm mispronouncing that. Ecumenicalism. That's right. Pints with Aquinas had a guest star in it. That guest star was 10-minute Bible hour. And it was amazing. The most interesting part for me was, at some point, Matt was like, let's have the Catholic argue the Protestant point, and let's have the Protestant argue the Catholic point. And here's what's sad about this episode. This time, for the first time, it was the Catholic who seemed more like a fundamentalist, and it was the evangelical free church person who seemed more like an open-minded universalist or universal Catholic. It was kind of bad. It was not good. The Catholic guy did not do a good job. He kind of sounded like a rad trad. He kind of sounded like a fundamentalist. He kind of sounded like a classic evangelical fundamentalist. It didn't make us look good. But what was really awesome was the challenge that Matt tried to instigate that the Pints guy just didn't seem to be able to catch on to. And I think it would make a great show, which is have a Catholic defend a Protestant point of view, have a Protestant defend a Catholic point of view, have a non-believer or an atheist defend the Christian point of view, have the Christian defend the atheist point of view, have a Baptist defend a Calvinist point of view, so on and so forth. You get the idea. Have a Jewish person defend a Muslim point of view, have a Muslim person defend a Jewish point of view. It would be awesome. It would be a way of both defending an opposing point of view, but also as an exercise to think outside your own bubble. That would be great. After that comes creating atheists. Both Bishop Barron and Trent Horn took on atheism this week. Trent Horn did 2 different videos, several different videos. He does 3 a week, but he also did a debate or discussion, but it was a debate. And to be honest with you, Trent Horn's stuff was not very interesting. He's very smart. He's very well educated, very well read. But the most interesting thing was when one of the atheists that he was talking to, and this might have been a week ago or so, was talking about time travel. Yeah. Anyway, but if you watch Bishop Barron's stuff, Bishop Barron was really good. Almost all of the stuff that Bishop Barron talked about this week and last week was much more pastoral and definitely worth a listen to. Then there is the question of, is the Bible inerrant? Both Jordan B. Cooper and myself took on this discussion. Jordan took on his discussion in the video called Discussions of the Inerrancy of Scripture, while I did mine on a video series, actually a four-part video essay called the Deconstruction of Bart D Ehrman. It's really good. It's really positive. And speaking of Bart, he also took on the Book of Revelation in one of the best scholarly and academic takes I've ever seen on YouTube to date on the Book of Revelation. I have my own series dissecting the Book of Revelation where I say much the same thing that he says in his video, but obviously his is a little bit more authoritative considering he is an expert and I'm not. I really do recommend watching his lecture. It is very good. And on top of that, he says something that I have been saying in my videos and that I said most recently on a guest spot I did on Gar Streams, Hey Garmania, which Garmania hosts. And what I said is this, is that the Book of Revelation is part of a genre called Apocalypse. And if you want to know something more about that genre, well, then you should read other apocalypses written at about the same time and around the same region. That way you wouldn't confuse what it's trying to say with what's metaphor and what's literal in there, if anything's literal in there. And the reason I say that is that you wouldn't want to confuse a mystery novel or a detective story with a police bulletin in a newspaper. And you definitely wouldn't want to confuse a novel about time travel or a romantic epic fiction with a history book. Then there's the podcast. So first up, I listened to Jordan Peterson's podcast, and he was taking on Canadian politics. And in this podcast, they were talking, it was titled Individuality and Autonomy, which honestly, after listening to both him and his daughter and their hot takes on it, I don't think this was a good move. This is not going to help him in his career or even in a political world if he wants to have one. It's good to see him back in action, but I think this was a misstep. Another podcast I listened to this past week was Dr. Deborah Soule and her podcast backing Brett Weinstein. The podcast was titled Dating Apps, Pornography, and the Sexual Double Standard. It's actually pretty decent. I recommend it. Now, lastly, let's answer a letter from a fan. Little Danny from Ohio writes to ask, what's your take on the Nietzschean concept of eternal return? Well, little Danny, as someone who watched Babylon 5 and Battlestar Galactica, the sci-fi version, multiple times, I can tell you that all this has happened before and all this will happen again. But more seriously, I would say that for me, that I believe that after the end of the universe, after everything collapsed within itself, when time is no more and everything goes back to its source, because matter and energy cannot truly be destroyed, it can only change form. Once that substance goes back to its source, that source is God. And I'm saying that as a Catholic Christian, or as a Christian Catholic, or however you want to put it. The source is God. So when everything returns to its source, it'll be part of God. Once time and creation end, once it becomes part of, once time ends and everything goes back to eternity, it'll be part of God. All right. So peace out. Peace out. If anybody has any suggestions for a title of the show, or if they enjoyed this episode, please comment down below. Hopefully I'll put up links for everything by the next day or two. And maybe I'll do this every Sunday if you all are interested. Peace.